Meet Tonye. He is 44 years old. He is a civil engineer who owns his own small construction firm in Port Harcourt, Rivers State. He has built roads, drainage systems, and school blocks for private clients across the South. He has never owed his workers salaries. He has never taken a government contract he could not deliver. In 2023, Tonye watched his local council election happen. He watched the winner emerge from a party primary he could not verify, with a ticket he was told cost several million naira to obtain. The man who won his councillorship had never fixed a single road in the community. Tonye knew his history, but Tonye could not stand against him, not because he was less qualified, not because the community did not want him, but because he is not a member of any political party, and Nigeria's constitution says that without a party card, you cannot contest an election. He asked a lawyer friend about this. The lawyer told him the truth. Section 221 of Nigeria's 1999 constitution says that no association other than a political party shall canvass for votes for any candidate at an election. In simple English, if you are not in a party, you cannot run, full stop. Tonye was surprised. He was even more surprised when his lawyer told him that Nigeria's National Assembly has tried to change this law 3 times, in 2010, in 2017, and most recently in 2023, and every single time the reform has died, either rejected by state assemblies or abandoned at the presidential assent stage. Here is the question Tonye asked his lawyer, and the question I want you to sit with through this entire video. If Nigeria has been trying to allow independent candidates for 27 years and keeps failing, who exactly is making sure it keeps failing? And can the current push in 2026 finally break the pattern? Before we go deeper, if you are just finding Naijanewswatch, welcome. This channel exists to break down what's really happening in Nigerian politics without the noise and without the spin. If that's the kind of analysis you enjoy, hit subscribe and stay with me, because this story is about to get a lot more interesting. Let me take you through the full history of Nigeria's independent candidacy reform, because understanding why it has failed 3 times is the only way to understand what is happening right now. Nigeria's Independence Constitution of 1960 actually permitted independent candidates. People could stand for election without a party ticket. That provision was removed during the military era, and when civilian rule returned in 1999, it was not restored. Instead, Section 221 of the 1999 Constitution hardwired party sponsorship as the only route to electoral participation. From 1999 to today, no Nigerian can contest any election, local government election, state assembly election, House of Representatives election, Senate, or President without a registered political party's nomination. The first serious attempt to change this came in 2010 during the constitutional amendment process under President Yaradua and then Jonathan. The independent candidacy bill was debated but rejected by the state houses of assemblies. The states were controlled by the same political parties that would lose power if independent candidates could win seats. The reform died. The second attempt came in 2017 under the Buhari administration. The National Assembly passed a set of constitutional alteration bills that included independent candidacy. But for a constitutional amendment to take effect, it requires a 2/3 majority in both chambers of the National Assembly, plus ratification by at least 24 state assemblies. The independent candidacy bill failed to get the required state assembly votes. It died again. The third attempt came in 2023, the most dramatic failure of all. The National Assembly passed Constitutional Alteration Bill No. 58 in May 2023, providing for independent candidacy from local government to presidential level. Both chambers passed it. The required 24 state assemblies ratified it. The bill was transmitted to President Buhari for assent, and Buhari left office in May 2023 without signing it. His successor, President Tinubu, took office. The bill lapsed. Now we are in August 2026, the 4th attempt. The National Assembly's Constitutional Review Committee has prioritized independent candidacy as one of 37 bills in the current amendment package. A Guardian Nigeria report from May 2026 confirms that calls for independent candidacy are intensifying, specifically because of the crisis in opposition parties, the Labour Party collapse, the ADC implosion, the NDC formation by Obi and Kwankwaso. Political stakeholders who were locked out of troubled party primaries are saying directly, "Give us the independent candidacy option." But as of today, the bill has not been voted on, has not passed both chambers, and has not gone to state assemblies. The window for it to take effect before January 2027 is extremely narrow. That's the full picture. 27 years, 3 failed attempts, 1 attempt in progress racing against an election clock. And every time this reform fails, the reason comes back to the same answer. The people who have the power to change the law are the people who benefit from the law staying exactly as it is. To understand why independent candidacy keeps dying in Nigeria, you need to understand the specific legal architecture that protects party dominance and how it was built. The wall. Section 221 of the 1999 Constitution. This is the provision that bars any association other than a political party from canvassing for votes or contributing to the funds of any candidate at an election. In simple English, if you are not in a party, you cannot run. That enormous threshold is designed to make constitutional change difficult, which is correct in principle, because constitutions should not be easy to alter. But it also means that every interest group that benefits from the current system has multiple veto points at which they can kill the reform. The proposed amendment requirements and why they are deliberately steep. The current bill before the National Assembly's Constitutional Review Committee proposes that for a presidential independent candidate to qualify, they must obtain verified signatures of at least 20% of registered voters from each of Nigeria's 36 states. Think about that number. Nigeria has tens of millions of registered voters. 20% of registered voters in each of 36 states is an extraordinarily high number. For comparison, no current presidential candidate, including Peter Obi, who ran the strongest third-party campaign in Nigerian 2023, would likely have been able to meet that signature requirement before the election. The bill as written appears to open the door to independent candidacy while building a signature wall that effectively keeps most people out. That's a deliberate design, a reform that looks inclusive on paper while remaining restrictive in practice. The current 2026 amendment timeline and why it almost certainly cannot apply to January 2027. For the independent candidacy amendment to apply to the 2027 election, it would need to complete the following steps: pass with a 2/3 majority in the National Assembly, be ratified by at least 24 state assemblies, receive presidential assent, be incorporated into the Electoral Act's operational framework, and be implemented by INEC with enough lead time for candidates to gather signatures, file forms, and appear on ballot papers. INEC's own electoral timetable has already set candidate filing deadlines that are weeks away. Even if the amendment passed the National Assembly tomorrow, the ratification process and implementation timeline make it virtually impossible for independent candidacy to be operational for January 16, 2027 presidential election. Civil society groups like PLAC, the Policy and Legal Advocacy Center, flagged this explicitly in their analysis of the 2027 electoral calendar. The window has not just narrowed, it has effectively closed for 2027. The gray area that the political class exploits. Nigeria's 1999 constitution has been amended 5 times since it was enacted. Each time, the constitutional review process generated enormous public debate and civil society advocacy, and each time, certain high-profile reforms, including independent candidacy and guaranteed seats for women in the legislature, have been passed at the federal level and then killed at the state assembly ratification stage. The pattern is not random. Governors control state assemblies through the same party structures that would be disrupted by independent candidates winning seats. A state assembly dominated by ACP members controlled by the governor does not voluntarily vote for a law that would allow someone to run against ACP candidates without a party ticket. The constitutional amendment process contains exactly the right number of state-level veto points to allow political groups to kill reforms that threaten them while appearing to follow democratic process. What this means for Tonye in Port Harcourt watching his local council election is direct and specific. Even if the National Assembly passes the independent candidacy amendment this week, he will not be able to run in January 2027. The timeline does not permit it. At best, independent candidacy could apply to off-cycle elections in 2028 or 2029, or to the 2031 general election if the amendment survives presidential assent and state ratification this time around. Tonye knows this now. He is watching the amendment debate with the same patience he has developed watching 3 previous versions of the same bill die. He is not holding his breath. Now, let's follow the money and the power, because the story of independent candidacy in Nigeria is ultimately a story about who profits from the current system and what they stand to lose if it changes. Start with the party ticket economy and how much it costs. In Nigeria's current system, the right to contest an election is bought and sold inside political parties. A form to express interest in contesting a gubernatorial primary in a major party before the primary has even happened can cost between 50 million naira and 250 million naira. A senatorial primary form can cost between 5 million and 50 million naira. A House of Representatives form can cost between 2 million and 30 million naira. These are not registration fees that go to the public treasury, they are fees paid to the party.
And who controls the party? The godfathers, the power brokers who decide which candidates the party machinery will support. A credible professional like Tonye, who has never needed or built political patronage networks, cannot access the ballot without paying a fee that may exceed his entire business's annual revenue. The godfather economy, what it actually means. Former INEC chairman, Professor Atahiru Jega, commenting on independent candidacy in May 2026, put it plainly. Given the lack of internal party democracy in most Nigerian political parties and the exclusionary politics this engenders, he supports independent candidacy as a corrective tool. Former Senate Minority Leader Oloronimbe Mamora said Nigerians' wishes should prevail over institutional resistance. Former Vice Chancellor Labode Popola said Nigeria should gradually adopt independent candidacy beginning from the local government level. These are credible senior Nigerian voices. They are not fringe advocates. And their shared assessment that parties are controlled by powerful individuals who determine who gets tickets describes the system accurately. The party primary is not a democratic process in most cases. It is a market, and the people running the market have a very strong financial interest in keeping it closed. The opposition party crisis as the immediate trigger for this debate. Guardian Nigeria's May 2026 analysis put it directly. The crisis rocking Nigeria's major opposition parties ahead of the 2027 general elections have renewed calls for independent candidacy. Labour Party collapsed from internal leadership warfare. ADC, legally unstable and fractured. NDC, 3 months old with untested structures. PDP, running 2 rival primary timetables from 2 rival factions. NNPP, Kwakwanso Gum. In this environment, there are credible, experienced politicians who have been locked out of party primaries through manipulation, money, or legal instability. They cannot contest on the party ticket they built their careers on. They cannot switch to another party without violating anti-defection provisions or being seen as political opportunists. The independent candidacy option, if it existed, would give them a legitimate path. Instead, they are stranded. The Sun Nigeria put it plainly in a May 28, 2026 report. The doors were shut and many candidates who lost at the primaries were politically stranded as they cannot defect to other parties at this odd hour or present themselves for election as independent candidates. Who benefits most from independent candidacy and why both major parties secretly oppose it? Here's the tension points that most coverage of this story misses. Both the APC and the PDP have publicly supported independent candidacy reform in their public statements at various times. Both have had members speak in favor of it, but both parties have also consistently failed to deliver the state assembly votes needed to ratify the amendment. The reason is structural. The APC controls 31 state governments. The PDP controlled a majority of states during the 2010 and 2017 failed amendment attempts. Both parties' state assemblies have, at different times, had the power to ratify the independent candidacy amendment and have failed to do so. The conclusion is uncomfortable, but the evidence supports it. The parties say yes to independent candidacy as a principle while ensuring it never becomes a law as a practice, because any state assembly member who votes to allow independent candidates is voting to make their own political boss less powerful. Nobody does that voluntarily. The global comparison that Nigeria's political class does not want you to make. South Africa passed an Electoral Amendment Act in 2023 specifically to allow independent candidates to contest national and provincial elections following a constitutional court judgment that found the blanket exclusion of independent candidates incompatible with the constitution. Kenya allows independent candidates at all levels. Ghana allows them. The African Court on Human and People's Rights found that Tanzania's constitutional ban on independent candidacy was incompatible with the African Charter. The international legal and democratic consensus is clear. Excluding independent candidates from elections is a restriction on the right to political participation. Nigeria is not just behind global democratic practice on this issue, it is operating a system that has been found incompatible with the continent's own human rights framework by an African court, and its legislature has failed to fix it 4 times in 27 years. The 2026 amendment packages 37 bills and independent candidacies place in it. The current constitutional amendment package contains 37 priority bills selected from 260 proposals that passed second reading. State Police is the flagship. It passed the Senate in June 2026 and is now awaiting House passage before State Assembly ratification. Independent candidacy is in the package. So are reserved seats for women in the legislature, local government autonomy, an electoral offences commission, and several judicial reform bills. The sheer number of bills in the package is significant. With this many proposals, each requiring 2/3 majorities and state ratification, there is enormous opportunity for political bargaining. Some bills will be supported in exchange for others being quietly killed. In that trading environment, independent candidacy, which threatens the party ticket economy that every state assembly member depends on, is the bill most likely to be quietly sacrificed to secure enough support for the others. State police, which governors want because it gives them security power, is the bill most likely to pass. Independent candidacy, which threatens governors' party control, is the bill most likely to die again. And here's the detail that closes this section. Nigeria's 1960 Independence Constitution permitted independent candidates. The military removed it. The 1999 Civilian Constitution restored many rights, but not this one. The Uwais Electoral Reform Committee, set up in 2007 to recommend improvements to Nigeria's electoral system, specifically recommended independent candidacy as a corrective tool. That recommendation has sat on the shelf for 19 years. Every National Assembly since 2007 has debated it. None has successfully enacted it. The reform is not being blocked because Nigerians do not want it. It is being blocked because the people who vote on it are the people it would most disrupt. Now, if what I just laid out surprises you, drop a comment below. I want to know your take before we get to the part that changes the whole picture.
Let me bring this back to Tonye in Port Harcourt. Watching his ward councillor deliver nothing for the 4th year in a row. Tonye is not asking for much. He is not asking to be president. He's not asking to be governor. He wants to contest his local council seat, the most basic unit of democratic representation in Nigeria. He wants to use his engineering skills to propose a drainage solution that would stop the flooding that shuts down his street every rainy season. He wants to do this through the democratic process, not around it. Nigeria's constitution says he cannot, not unless he joins a political party, pays whatever the primary form costs, navigates the godfather network inside that party, and either wins or survives the primary process. And if he refuses all of that, if he says he would rather stand before his community on his own record without a party machinery deciding his fate, he has no legal pathway. Not in 2027, possibly not even in 2031, depending on what the National Assembly does in the next few months. For Nigeria's democracy as a whole, the continued failure to enact independent candidacy has 2 specific consequences. First, it means that the only people who can contest elections are people who can operate inside the party ticket economy, people with money, patronage networks, or willingness to compromise with political godfathers. The engineer, the teacher, the community health worker, the farmer who wants to represent her local government and has the trust of the community, none of them can access the ballot. Second, it means that party fragmentation crises like the ones we have seen in 2023 and 2026, with Labour Party, ADC, NDC, and PDP all collapsing or fracturing, produce stranded politicians who would be natural independent candidates but have no legal outlet. The independent candidacy reform would give the democratic system a pressure valve. Without it, the pressure has nowhere to go except into the next party fragmentation. The international dimension of this story is real and has a specific legal weight that Nigerian lawmakers rarely acknowledge publicly. The African Court of Human and People's Rights, which is the continent equivalent of the European Court of Human Rights, has ruled that a constitutional ban on independent candidacy is incompatible with the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. This ruling came in a case involving Tanzania, but its reasoning is directly applicable to Nigeria, which is also a signatory to the African Charter. Nigeria has never formally challenged this ruling or argued that Section 221 of its constitution is consistent with the Charter. It has simply continued to operate a system the continent's own court has flagged as inconsistent with African human rights law. South Africa's comparison is the most instructive. The South African Constitutional Court found in 2022 that the requirement for candidates to be party members to contest national and provincial elections was unconstitutional. The National Assembly passed the Electoral Amendment Act in 2023 to allow independent candidates. That reform happened in under 2 years from court ruling to legislation. Nigeria has had 19 years since the Uwais Committee recommended the same reform and 4 legislative failures. The comparison is not flattering. For international democracy monitoring organizations watching Nigeria's 2027 environment, the failure to enact independent candidacy reform is one data point in a broader assessment. EU observer missions and Commonwealth monitoring teams look at legal barriers to political participation as a component of democratic quality. A country that constitutionally restricts electoral participation to party members and has repeatedly failed to remove that restriction despite majority parliamentaries for the change is a country that scores poorly on inclusive political participation indicators. That score affects how international observers frame their pre-election assessment of Nigeria's democratic environment heading into January 2027. Let me be honest about the strongest arguments against independent candidacy, because they deserve to be heard seriously. The strongest case for the current system: party structures stabilize democracy. University Don Adebayo Williams, commenting in May 2026, made the most credible conservative argument. Nigeria's political system since 1999 has been built around strong political parties, and those parties, however imperfect, provide the organizational infrastructure for elections to function. Without party structures, he argued, you risk a fragmentation of the electoral field into dozens of candidates, reduced accountability, and a system where wealthy individuals with personal networks can win without any policy commitment to a constituency. He pointed out that even in the United States, often cited as a model for independent candidacy, independent presidential candidates have never won. The party system, despite its flaws, channels political competition into manageable structures. That is not a foolish argument, it's a serious one. The logistics concern and former INEC chairman Jega's caveat. Former INEC chairman Atahiru Jega, while supporting independent candidacy in principle, warned against a blanket provision that would allow every person to vie for elective positions. The 20% signature requirement in the proposed bill is designed to address this, creating a threshold that proves genuine community support before a candidate can access the ballot. But critics argue the logistics of verifying signatures at that scale across every ward in 36 states for a presidential aspirant would overwhelm INEC's capacity, invite fraud in the signature gathering process, and potentially produce more legal challenges than the current primary system generates. These are legitimate operational concerns that the bill's current design does not fully resolve. But here's where both arguments fall apart when you test them against evidence. The party system that Williams defends as a stabilizing force is the same party system that has produced the ADC collapse, the Labour Party implosion, the NDC formation in February 2026. All of these are symptoms of a system under pressure from individuals who cannot express their democratic ambitions through the legal channels available. Independent candidacy is not a panacea for Nigeria's democracy's problems, but it's a pressure valve that the system desperately needs, and every year it's blocked, the pressure builds somewhere else. Let me take you back to Tonye in Port Harcourt, asking his lawyer the question he should not have to ask any democracy. Who exactly is making sure independent candidacy keeps failing, and can the current push in 2026 finally break the pattern? Here's my honest answer to both parts of that question. The people making sure it keeps failing are not a secret group. They are the elected officials sitting in state assemblies across Nigeria, officials who were nominated by party structures, whose political survival depends on party structures, and who will not voluntarily vote to weaken the machinery that put them in office. It's not a conspiracy, it's a rational institutional interest. A state assembly member who ratifies independent candidacy is helping create the legal conditions under which someone without a party ticket can challenge them or their party's candidate at the next election. Rational people don't vote for their own political vulnerability unless they are forced to. Can the 2026 push break the pattern?
The honest answer is probably not for 2027. The timeline is too tight. INEC's candidate filing deadline is close. Even if the National Assembly acts immediately, the state ratification process and operational implementation cannot happen in time for the presidential election in January 2027. Tonye will not be able to contest as an independent candidate in January 2027. That is the factual position as of August 2026. But the 2026 push matters for a different reason. If the amendment passes the National Assembly this time, goes to state assemblies and gets ratified, even if it arrives too late for the presidential race, it will be law, and law creates precedent. The first independent candidates who win ward or local government seats in 2027 by-elections or 2028 local council elections will be the proof of concept that Nigeria's political class has been resisting for 27 years. And once the proof exists, the argument for keeping independent candidates out of state and federal races becomes harder to make. The change Tonye is waiting for will not come in 2027, but whether it comes at all depends on what happens in the next 3 months, in the National Assembly, in the 36 state assemblies, and in the presidential office, where the fourth version of this bill may or may not receive assent. I want to hear from you. Do you think Nigeria should allow independent candidates, and do you think the National Assembly will finally pass this reform before 2027? And if you're someone who has been shut out of a party primary you deserve to win, tell me your story in the comments. This one is worth fighting for. If this breakdown gave you clarity on what's really going on, do me a favor, share it with one person who needs to understand this. Like the video, subscribe to Naijanewswatch, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp.